I guess in the Yankees one.
Sure did.
I just saw Frank the Tank's tweet about,
Oh, fuck, I've been waiting for it.
or it's from Barstool, but it was like the reaction to when they
Okay.
gave up
I saw
6
that on
runs.
he was live streaming, and I was watching.
Yeah.
Shit's fucking hilarious. He usually does like an individual tweet after every game, and it cracks me up because even like Mets have like the second best record in the league, and based on his reaction, you'd think they're fucking the White Sox last year.
Yeah. Or the Orioles this year.
True.
What's wrong with them? Like, I don't know why they're bad.
They just
I know they lost Burns, but
they just didn't make any like high profile moves in the offseason, and all of their like homegrown guys are underperforming this year. Like Rushman, their catcher, is just not having a great year.
Yeah.
Gunnar Henderson was out a little bit. I don't know what his numbers are right now, but that's really bad. The pitching's been really bad.
Yeah.
That's what, like they lost Burns, and then their moves to, I mean, they had Grayson Rodriguez is one of their top prospects, and he was supposed to be in the rotation. He got hurt in spring training. Another pitcher they traded for last year got hurt, and like their offseason move was they signed a 35-year-old from Japan he won like 3 MVPs in Japan, like the equivalent of their MVP in Cy Young or whatever, and he's got decent numbers here, but yeah, he's a 35-year-old rookie, and that's like their high profile pitching move.
As I was like looking at their record, and obviously when they fired their manager, I was like,
Yeah,
damn, that's crazy because they had like the best record last year, right? Or like one of them?
no,
Or was that 2 years ago?
2 years ago, yeah.
Because I remember them saying like, look at how many young guys we have. Like we basically stocked up on our prospects, and now they're all coming into their own, and then they're fucking 15-30 now, which is what, like like 2.5 games ahead of the White Sox, which is pretty crazy.
I just opened the streams at a very bad time, so anything you just said I missed.
That's fine.
I was hearing your voice 3 different ways. All right. Testing Twitch 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Testing Twitch 1 2 3 1 2 3.
I think we're good. Let's check YouTube. I just heard the mic. I got nothing on, not touching the desk. I don't know. Maybe I gotta just like take it apart and reattach it. I don't know. I think volume sounds fine though.
Yep. Ready to get started?
Yep.
Hello and welcome to episode 176 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are wrapping up the online portion of the 2025 Call of Duty League season. And we have, I think, quite a bit to talk about today, including maybe checking in on the concern level for 2 teams in particular, maybe 3 if you consider OpTiC'S week concerning, which it certainly was bizarre. And we also have obviously the final qualifier standings from the Major 4 qualifiers, and that means we also have the Major 4 bracket set and finalized before the tournament starts next weekend. But before we do any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Doing all right. Like you said, online Call of Duty for Black Ops 6 season is officially over. Well, I should say the professional season, because Challenger still has some online stuff as far as I'm aware. But yeah, as far as the CDL goes, no more online matches for most likely, next 6 months until December, maybe November, depending on when the next COD title is released. So that's exciting. It's also, you can look at it a couple ways. It's exciting because it means we got only land remaining in the biggest land events of the season, but it also means there is less Call of Duty on the calendar now, just because for all the issues and everything that plagued the online portion of the CDL season, it does do a good job of filling up uh, the calendar and the schedule and giving content on a regular basis for us to dissect and stuff like that. So a little bit of a double-edged sword, but nonetheless, the online portion of the season's over. We got land to talk about and all that good stuff. But yeah, we'll be here breaking down these last couple online matches, and then we're good to go.
Yeah, what you said about it filling up time, filling up a lot of these months of basically filler, it also gives us a lot of reason to nitpick these teams and to it gives us a lot of tape to look at these teams and say this team is not a true contender or why this team is a true contender. I think we should start off with two teams in particular though, and that is the Carolina Royal Ravens and the Toronto Ultra. At certain points in this season, I think you could convince yourself that they were contenders in their own right. Carolina has been very surprising, or to a certain point, were very surprising in how competitive they were against the top of the league and how dominant they were against the bottom of the league. The Toronto Ultra, I think, were certainly expected to be better than Carolina was coming into this year, and they've had a little bit of up and down performances. They were very, very good in the beginning, and then they kind of leveled off. And I believed coming into these qualifiers, you could convince yourself that they were kind of on the upswing. And even if you were coming into this final week of the qualifiers, funnily enough, I think because they were 3-0 heading into the final week, you could convince yourself that they would be the first seed and that they would be having a lot of momentum coming into Major 4. That is not the case. Toronto, they go 0-2 this week. They lose 3-1 against Vancouver and then get swept by OpTic Texas, who we'll talk about a little bit later in depth. Carolina, on the other hand, also goes 0-2 this week, 3-1 loss to Minnesota, and they get swept by the Miami Heretics, who we'll also talk a little bit more a little bit later. I don't think that they're in the exact same spot, speaking of Toronto and Carolina, but I thought that the fact that they both went 0-2, the fact that going into the final major when you are not at your highest or not clicking the way that you were. For Toronto, it was just a few weeks ago. For Carolina, it's now a month and a half ago. They've really struggled since Rex has come into this roster. What is the concern level for you? Let's start with Toronto first, because we did talk about Carolina kind of in a similar vein last week. But for Toronto, them going 0-2, now they finished the qualifiers 3-2. Is there some cause for concern for the Toronto Ultra in your view?
I think you could make the case that there is some cause for concern, but it's not quite necessarily, at least the way I'm thinking of it. It might not necessarily be for the reason other people are thinking about it, or being like, they see this 0-2 week and that's why they're concerned. I think the way I'm thinking about it, especially like just breaking down this week, the loss against Vancouver, you can definitely, make the case that Vancouver has been the better team of late, been in the last two grand finals. So maybe you just, that's a tough match and it's a good team. The OpTic match, I think, is a bigger loss for Toronto on another level outside of the game, and really that stems that comes down to the whole Merc and Bean situation. And there's already been talk in the community after Major 3 about what Toronto should do with Mercules after he fills in for Beans with the visa issues and stuff like that. Should they have kept Mercules in the roster and made that move? Regardless of what you think the answer to that question is, I don't want to say like this match proved that Toronto should have kept Mercules, but I think at the very core of this conversation, that just has to be like a thought in the Toronto camp for the rest of the year going forward. Like it's got to be something in the back of their head.
Mm-hmm.
And even someone like Beans, like now he's got to try and go out there the rest of this year, and he's just thinking like, I don't want to say this is what he's thinking, but I'm trying to put myself in that situation. Like it feels like that has to, you can tune out the noise and all that stuff, but it has to be like something that's at least thought about for even like a slight second there. And if there's any doubt creeping into the minds of the players or the people involved in that camp heading into these, end of season tournaments where we talk about it every year, um the money's the biggest, the pedigree is the biggest and all that stuff. So they're really, the most important tournaments, like you want to be playing your best Call of Duty at that time. And if that's like, an out of game factor like that has any impact, that can like have, drastic ramifications on the way Toronto season ends. So I don't want to sit here and say like, it's all doom and gloom for Toronto. I definitely think they're a really strong team. Well, I've sung the praises of the Jodeci's and Kleenex sub duo most of this season. But I do think, like, to at least some degree, it's not even like saying prove the doubters wrong, at least from Mercury's perspective. Like, I just think it has to be like something that Beans is going to be thinking about now. And he can, he probably won't admit it even if he is thinking about it, but like, I don't know. It just feels like that's a bigger topic or conversation or just something to think about more than the actual loss itself to OpTic. And me, and, end of the day, maybe I'm making a bigger deal out of that than necessarily. Like, it's just an online match. Toronto have had issues in online matches as recently as like last month. So, maybe end of the day, the server stuff was messing with them and they weren't able to play up to the level we've seen them play on land this year. But I definitely think like that, if you're on the Toronto side of things, and especially the Bean side of the Beans versus Mercury's debate, like this result today has to at least get you thinking about what could have been for Toronto if they stuck with Mercury's, and as a result of that, what would be for OpTic if they weren't in this position where they picked Mercury's up. We'll get to OpTic later, but yeah, weird spot for Toronto heading into the major. I still, I am not totally concerned about their level of play, especially, like I said, heading into LAN. Still think they're a really good team, and they have the, obviously they come off a third place finish at Major 3 with a emergency substitute. If they have, again, that's a weird spot for Beans too, because if they place anything lower than third at Major 4 here, people are going to be saying like, oh, that proves, you should have kept Mercury's over Beans and all that stuff. So, kind of a weird spot in that degree, but nonetheless, I definitely expect Toronto to, try and perform up to the level we've seen at this upcoming major. And I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but
They're gonna have to prove
they have
again.
they have a chance at revenge
Mm-hmm.
very soon, and the storylines are there for another Beans versus Mercury's matchup at Major 4 itself. So we'll get to see that showdown on land very soon.
Even if it isn't, in Beans's mind, right? That okay, like Mercules, I got picked over Mercules, and maybe that shouldn't have happened. Whatever. It doesn't really matter because people will remind him unless he completely cuts off social media and doesn't look at all that stuff. Doing this against OpTic of all teams, that they are going to make sure that Beans remembers. Especially heading into this match, which obviously they play OpTic in the first round of the Major 4. They're going. The Green Wall is going to nitpick at Beans, and they are going to remind Beans, "Hey, remember when you got picked over Mercules and now he's beating you and he's going to beat you again at the major. And if that happens again at the major, then it's just going to keep getting worse. And I don't think that's like, I think that would happen against any team. If Mercules signed with FaZe, if he signed with Vancouver or literally any other team, but OpTic just has more fans, and then there's going to be more people on social media talking about this. So if it's not already in the back of his mind, I believe that, unless he's just completely able to block out the social media noise, I think it probably will be at least something to consider as they go into Major 4. But yeah, I think for Toronto, I've never been really convinced that they're one of the top teams. Even coming into the season, I wasn't really convinced that Beans and Joe Deceives were going to be able to sufficiently, not entirely replace someone like Scrap, or Scrap and Envoy, but I didn't think that they would be able to be in that like top 3 group. And I don't even remember who I would have had in the top 4, but I didn't believe that they were a top team coming in. And I think they've been surprising in some ways, but also kind of predictable in other ways. They've had these shortcomings, and they haven't had the cleanest of seasons. Like even at, from the very beginning, they go, I believe 6-0 to start the qualifiers. They lose to OpTic in their final qualifier of the Major 1. And then I don't think they really performed up to standard for a little bit. And it feels like they're kind of rounding into form. They're becoming maybe like the 5th best team in the league, because, you could probably argue 4th best if on a good day or whatever. But I still think like stuff like this, and it's not the Vancouver loss, because losing to Vancouver is just like kind of something that happens. FaZe has lost to Vancouver. A lot of really good teams have, and we've already talked about how Vancouver is one of the top 3 teams in the entire league, and that's not really debatable. So losing that match is not really concerning from my point of view. Losing to OpTic, though, especially considering we had just seen what OpTic did in their first match of the weekend, that makes it quite concerning. If OpTic had won their first match, then you could kind of convince yourself that it's not a big deal. But it was a 3-0, and OpTic had just lost to not only one of the worst teams this season, but one of the worst teams in CDL history. And you could argue that it's online COD, it's kind of unpredictable. Everything that goes into it is not as clean and as neat and as perfect as LAN, and that wouldn't happen on LAN. But still, the fact remains that they lost to a team who lost to a horrible team. So the only kind of thing you can take out of that, and it wasn't like it was a weird series in general. Like this hardpoint that they played, Vault Hardpoint, I don't know how many maps haven't gone to 250 this season. It's like a handful. It's not that many. I don't remember the last time a team did not even get to 230, and these two teams finished 220 to 216 on Vault Hardpoint. I do not remember that low scoring of a hardpoint in a really long time. So you could argue that it's a weird series, but that's going to cause like trepidation, especially when you play that team right away in the major. I still probably would favor Toronto just because we have not seen OpTic perform well on LAN at any point this season, where you have seen Toronto actually have decent performances, even if it is with Mercules most recently at Major 3. But you at least have some kind of idea of what a Toronto run would look like at a major, and we don't have that with OpTic. So I think there's a lot of things to think about in regards to the Toronto Ultra as we move forward. I want to shift off Toronto real quick and talk about Carolina. If you get your last point in, and then we'll talk about Carolina.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring up the stats because I think it also, especially after doing the whole Beans versus Mercules comparison, Beans 61 kills in the series and Mercules had 62. So it's not like, OpTic 3-0'd Toronto where Mercules went off and Beans dropped a 0.5. Like they were in the same, vicinity in the kills department. And I just, at the end of the day, I think it's there are interesting ways to dissect the situation in both of these teams, but especially if you're a Toronto fan, I think best case scenario is you get this immediate rematch to kick off Major 4, and you get the chance to prove what you're capable of. And potentially prove that this may have been a fluke. And if you're Optic, you also get the chance to prove this wasn't a fluke. So
Yeah, and I mean, you could also argue that Mercules and Optic, that has not been the greatest results yet either, obviously, considering they lost to LAG before this. So I really think it's hard to compare and say, well, if they had Mercules, they obviously would have won these two matches, when Optic themselves are not having the perfect run with Mercules, even if it is, pretty positive, or at least it's been a little more consistent than they've been used to in the past few months. So I just think people probably could slow down on that, but you're not going to get people to slow down when they know that it could have been one or the other, or they think that it could have been one or the other. But let's talk about Carolina now, because they are in a completely different situation than Toronto. They had the same week. Both of these teams went 1-6 in map count. They went 0-2 in their matches. But Carolina, this has been a consistent, sustained lack of success now. They, with these two losses this week, have lost 8 of their last 9, with the only win being 2 weeks ago against the Boston Breach. Other than that, they have won, I believe, they've won 5 maps in 9 series, which is not good, I would imagine. And or they've won 8, excuse me, but 5 in the 8 series they've lost. So it's obviously they haven't been very competitive in a lot of these matches. And I think we talked about it last week after their, I think it was, they just had one match against Optic and they lost 3-0. And obviously we didn't really know exactly how Optic and Mercules were going to look. But still, I think this week is probably even more concerning. They lose to Minnesota, first match of the weekend for them, and they lose 3-1. And then they lose to the Miami Heretics 3-0. It's kind of a similar situation like Toronto. Toronto loses to Vancouver. Okay, you can understand that. Then they lose to Optic, and then you're like, okay, that's a little weird. For Carolina, it's flipped. Them losing to Minnesota off the bat is concerning. Like the fact that, Minnesota has struggled to win a lot of series. Minnesota is fighting for a spot at champs and is on the outside looking in at the moment. And then Miami, of course, is a team that seems to be kind of clicking right now, and they are the only team that went 5-0 in these qualifiers. So you could understand that one, but it's also looking at the larger sample now. The fact that they've had so much trouble winning even maps with Rex. We talked about it last week. I asked you, were you concerned about Carolina now that it was a few weeks after the Rex acquisition or the Rex signing, replacing Vivid? Now that we're another week removed from that and they have failed to win again, how much more concerned are you about Carolina going into the final major of this season?
Yeah, I think the only realistic way to answer that is, I mean, if you look at the the overall standings for the CDL points, um, Carolina's in 6th right now at 220, and I think at this point, if you said they're the 6th best team in the game, I think that would raise a lot of eyebrows. I think there were points earlier in the season where the inverse was true, where people, they got off to a good start and people were rating them highly, and people weren't ready to jump on that bandwagon. But then, now they're really benefiting from that early start they've had because they've struggled so much of late. And I think, honestly, if, it's not a stretch to say they've played like one of the worst teams in the league as of late. I mean, they're starting the major in the losers bracket, so I don't think that's an outlandish statement. And I mean, I like this team. I like the guys on this team. I'm happy that Rex has gotten an opportunity, and even in some of these losses, he has shown that he can compete at the CDL level. Um, but it's tough, and I think. I obviously think we'll get into it more after Major Four, but there's a lot of opportunity for a team like Carolina to really put in some work between Major Four and champs, and I feel like they have to if they want to uh, change the direction of where their season is heading right now. But yeah, just as of late, this Carolina team hasn't inspired a lot of confidence in me to believe in them. And I will say, like, they had these two matches this week similar to the Toronto situation, like you said. Toronto loses to Vancouver, way Vancouver's played despite like that 0-2 week uh, earlier in these qualifiers. They're still a really good team. Can't say much about that. Same thing here for the Miami been playing really well since Super joined the roster and in the youth qualifiers in particular. So you can't take too much away from that. But the Minnesota series is one. Um, I picked Minnesota to win that one just because we saw them play at Major 3 and Minnesota won that matchup. But we've talked about it. It's kind of just a weird series in the sense that these maps are pretty close. Like Carolina wins 250 to 240 in the hard point, a 6-5 in the search, 3-2 in the control, and a 250-174 on Skyline hard point to end it. So that's the least close map of the whole series.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like Carolina got blown out by Minnesota or anything like that. But yeah, given the situation that both of those teams are in heading into that match, it's a must-win match for Minnesota in terms of their champs aspirations, but it really should have been a must-win match for Carolina just in terms of like momentum and trying to, get the train back on the tracks or whatever saying you want to say there. So, I will, Carolina at the end of the day, they play these two matches against Minnesota and Miami, and both searches they lose, but they are both 6-5s. So that's been Carolina's calling card all year. They almost pulled off a 5-2 comeback against Miami. Miami's just one of the best search teams at this point, and really since Super joined the roster. So maybe some small adjustments in search, and Carolina is looking a little better. But if they can't consistently win the respawns against any team, then the search can only matter so much, right? So end of the day, I babbled a little bit there. I definitely am worried about this Carolina team, but we've seen it at different points this year, and it's kind of similar to Minnesota, where we talk about like Miro, Gio, and Estriel all having their pop-off moments and never like really consistently doing it at the same time. I feel like for Carolina, we've seen Gwen, especially in the online portion of the season, play really well. TJ early in the season at Major 1 popped off. Slasher early in the season online played well. So we've seen this team play well at different times. If they can put it together on land, especially with some more time with Dylan Rex in the picture, that they're in a situation where they're at least, it's not like Minnesota where they're playing these matches and losing and their season's going to be over soon. They have that buffer from earlier in the season where they can work through some of these struggles and still at the end of the day be competing at champs. But if they want to do more than place top 8 at champs, we have to see some sort of improvement, and I'm just not totally confident that is going to happen right now.
Yeah, I was just looking through their schedule. I believe they had 16 match wins post Major 2 qualifiers, and then they lose 2 of their 3 matches at Major 2. They lose 3 of their 5 matches in Major 3 qualifiers. And obviously that last match of the Major 3 qualifiers was Rex's debut with the roster. They lost to LA Thieves. No surprise there. They go to Major 3. They get double first rounded. They lose to Minnesota, coincidentally, in that losers round 1 to get eliminated. And so they've only won 1 match with Rex. And I believe they are 1-7 with him now in total. I just don't know how they get anywhere. I just don't think this roster change has worked out. And I think you maybe can say that, well, we're going to have some practice post Major 4 before we get to champs. I completely understand that. But what makes you believe that you're going to do it now? Like, it's not that you're just losing these matches. Some of these matches are not close. They have not gone to a game 5 with Rex in this roster. If they don't win the series, which they won that one series against the Boston Breach 2 weeks ago, everything else was either 3-0 or 3-1 loss. That makes me think that you really just don't have it, or you're really not that close to having it. And I would be very, very concerned if I was a Carolina fan. I don't know if you saw that their parent company, what Napster, I believe, is like now their parent company's name. I don't know if that was fake news or whatever, but I saw something about that. Like the old music download
Yeah, I
place.
was gonna say that's the thing from like the Facebook movie that Justin Timberlake's dude
Yeah.
founded or whatever. That's how I know it.
So I'm pretty sure it was that their their parent company of the Carolina Royal Ravens has rebranded to Napster, according to Breaking Point, and that was on May 16th, so 2 days ago.
Oh, I missed that.
And so I just bring that up just because I thought it was interesting. But obviously, it is for Carolina. It's just like I had my reservations about dropping Vivid because I understood the point of Vivid is not performing very well statistically. Even before then, Carolina was kind of up and down. I don't believe they've had 2 consecutive wins since the major 2 qualifiers. So that's now over 2 months. 2 months ago. So they've struggled with just stringing together wins, even against some of the lower tier teams. Granted, they have played very difficult teams, and I'll give them that out because you look at Major 2, their 2 losses were to Vancouver and LA Thieves. The Major 3 qualifiers, their 3 losses were to Atlanta, Vancouver, and LA Thieves. At Major 3, they lost to LA Thieves and Minnesota. The Minnesota loss is the obviously much more concerning. And these Major 4 qualifiers, their losses were to Toronto, OpTic, Minnesota, and Miami. That's not a killer's row necessarily, but you could argue that Toronto was looking pretty good in that match at least. OpTic, I think at their high end is pretty good. It's just about whether they're going to get there. Again, Minnesota is a little more concerning, and Miami, of course, finished this qualifiers 5-0. So if you want to be optimistic, you can look and say, okay, we were never good against these top teams anyway. But when I brought up the stats about last week, is like their map counts are also getting worse. Even against the top teams. And now they can't win S&D, it seems like. They lost 2 round 11s, which again, if you want to be optimistic about, you can say, well, it's a coin flip. We lost 2 coin flips, and then, that kind of snowballs. But it still is kind of emblematic of a deeper issue that they can't even win the searches. Obviously, the hard point has essentially dissipated. Like, they don't really have any hard point game, it seems like, anymore. In the fact that, I think obviously they're not getting to game 5s. So if you can't get to game 5s, how good you are at S&D doesn't really matter all that much, to be honest, because that's only going to be one of the 4 maps. You have to actually get to a game 5. You have to win respawns to really even get there. So I have a lot of concern for the Royal Ravens. I do not foresee Major 4 being a breakout performance. If you look at who they play, if they drop down, it's OpTic or Toronto, 2 teams that they've lost to in these qualifiers. Toronto, just in general, has been a team that's kind of been in the thorn, a thorn in Carolina's side. OpTic obviously just beat them as well. So I don't know. Like, it's just, we're gonna look back obviously, and post this season, we'll probably look back at this roster change, and we'll probably look at a lot of roster changes throughout the year. Of course, OpTic's various changes throughout the season. But I think what we look back at is, did Carolina make the right move by dropping Vivid for Rex? Because that one is going to be scrutinized, especially if the bad performances keep coming for the Carolina Royal Ravens.
But I will, to the same point that you just made, and don't want to sound too repetitive here.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about it with LAT, especially right after they brought Rex into the lineup. They weren't beating these top teams in LAT with Vivid, and that hasn't changed with Rex. So, we can be critical of the team for, a variety of reasons, but if they weren't beating really good teams with either iterations of the roster, I don't, I don't know how much we can, really fault the roster change in itself. It might just be a bigger issue with the team as a system and group as a whole. But yeah, we can talk about that more
Yeah.
once the season's over.
Yeah, that's a good point. But, we did talk about it when the change happened that it's kind of taking a swing for it. And
Yeah,
sometimes you
exactly.
take a swing and it works out. You hit a home run. Sometimes you strike out. And this might be a strikeout. We'll just have to see how it plays out over the next 5 or 6 weeks.
Very, very small note there, but that
Yeah.
is one of my favorite things in baseball. Is when somebody is used as a pinch hitter and they're brought in, everyone's expecting a hit, and pinch hitting is one of the most difficult things to do because you're bringing someone who hasn't played the entire game off the bench to go. In many cases in today's game, they're going in to face someone who throws 98 100 miles an hour, and in some cases they get 3 pitches cold off the bench, and then they're struck out or they get out. And everyone likes to freak out and be like, oh, that guy didn't produce in that situation. It's like, well, it wasn't the most advantageous position to be put in, and baseball in itself, like, if you get a hit in 3 out of 10 uh, plate appearances, you're one of the greats in today in many ages of baseball. So that's a good analogy in terms of like looking at this roster move. Like, you probably say, Carolina wasn't hitting very well in terms of the baseball analogy, and then they took a swing for it by pinch hitting Rex for Vivid, and he hasn't had that desired result. And we'll talk more about them later. I think my big thing for Rex and even someone like Lunars, um, these guys who, unlike Neptune and Super, have joined and immediately seen success. They're guys who have joined these teams and haven't seen the same success that they saw in Challengers, and how that impacts their future in the CDL. That's something I will be curious to see and want to talk about more as we get into the off season.
Another team that has kind of taken a swing for it, maybe not as big of a swing, definitely we're not in the exact same position as Carolina, but the Miami Heretics are a team that we just have to talk about even more. I did not expect to be talking about the Miami Heretics as much as we are now at the beginning of the season, considering, Miami last season was like they had that really good start and then they tailed off, and then they kind of finished where we imagined they would at the beginning of the year. This has been different. They did have that one major where it was like, all right, like maybe we're going to have to talk about Miami, and then they tailed off a little bit, but they've come back strong and even stronger than they were to begin the year. Now, the Miami Heretics are the first seed at Major 4. They were the only team to go 5-0 in the Major 4 qualifiers. They had a 15-6 map count in these qualifiers, and they have officially won 11 of their last 14 matches. I believe 8 of their last 10. And the swing we were talking about was bringing in Super, something that they had brought him in previously as an emergency substitute, and then officially brought him in a little bit later to be the full-time replacement. And he has been everything and more for this team, teaming up with guys like Rincor and Real. Real, we figured at that point he was already kind of like a superstar that just didn't have the talent around him to kind of reach his full potential. I don't believe either one of us had the expectation that Super actually might be the real superstar on this team, and that he maybe there's like a superstar duo or trio kind of waiting, and that they can elevate each other. Because now Super has the highest KD of any of these players. And obviously we talked about like KD is not everything, but he has a 1.12 KD so far this season, and they are having this magical run. Now they have reached all the way up to 5th place in the CDL standings. They are 15 points ahead of the Carolina Royal Ravens. They're not going to catch Vancouver. They're 95 points behind 4th place, but they very much could figure out a way to finish in 5th place, especially if Carolina continues to do what Carolina's been doing. But the Miami Heretics, they are 18-18 on the season. I have to look back on it. They are literally 50-50. They have 18 match wins, 18 match losses, 75 map wins, 75 map losses. I don't know how often that happens, but I would have to go back and look at the exact record they had previously before Super came into the roster. But if there's any kind of argument for Super, who came in later than, I believe he came in the major 3 qualifiers to start, if I'm not mistaken. If there's an argument to be made for Rookie of the Year, it would be the fact that they have completely changed the game essentially over these last 6 to 7 weeks. What do you think of Miami, and do you believe that they are a true contender? Obviously we've talked about like what we think are the top 3, LAT, Atlanta, and Vancouver, in whatever order you want to go in. Is there any chance they're in that top 3, or are they kind of solidly below that?
I mean, all I'll say, at least on the first note, you said they can't catch Vancouver. I just made sure you get 100 points if you win the major. And given Vancouver's first round matchup in the losers bracket, if Vancouver somehow gets top 12 at major 4 and Miami wins it, they could
Yeah,
swap places
I
in the
shouldn't
CDL
underestimate them.
standings.
So
At the end of the day, though, that doesn't necessarily mean a ton
they'll play
because,
each other.
yeah, they're the 4 or 5 seeds, so then they'd still play each other at champs. Um, but yeah, I mean, like you said, I don't know if you said the exact record, but I believe they're 9-1 in the qualifier matches at least since
Mm-hmm.
bringing Super in. They went 4-1 last major qualifiers and 5-0 this time. The only loss in the major 3 qualifiers was to Toronto, who they ended up playing in the first round um, of major 3. Obviously, with the Beans and Mercules situation, that was Mercules' debut, so you can put an asterisk on that if you want. But regardless, this team just really has flipped a switch with Super, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but the just the comparisons in my head and the similarities to the situation with Real in Miami last year, where they make that late season or after the halfway point season roster move. And definitely last year it took longer for them to get to um, a better place. And you could argue that this year it took less time for Super to elevate this team to even a higher point than Real did with the squad last year. That kind of feels like semantics, but yeah, end of the day, I really think very highly of this team. I know any loyal Ego Chall listeners are going to know that if a team plays as well in Search and Destroy as a squad like Miami does, they're going to have my attention, and I'm going to be a fan of them. Um, I do have to, again, don't want to get too ahead of ourselves with talking about Major 4. I think they have a favorable first round matchup, but the second round matchup, they're in a position where they play Thieves or Vancouver just based on how the qualifier standings broke down. That's a tough first round matchup, and whoever wins that is going to be a tough second round matchup for Miami, even if Miami is playing at their best. I know Miami did just beat LA Thieves earlier in these qualifiers, so you can say that, but it's still end of the day, it's a tough matchup either way, and it's not like an easy walk in the park for Miami with them being the 1 seed heading into Major 4. So I think we do have to congratulate Miami on just really turning things around and really stepping things up, especially since bringing Super into the roster. Uh, if they end up winning Major 4, I think it's not even close in my opinion that Super. Well, I won't say that. If they win Major 4 and Rencor is the MVP of the tournament, then you have to give him Rookie of the Year in my opinion. But if they win Major 4 and anybody else but Rencor or Super is MVP, then I think Super is the Rookie of the Year just because despite not playing the entire season, the level that he brought the squad to, and if he brings them a championship, that has to be factored into the voting. So, yeah, I just think really really happy. I think the Vamos crowd has to be happy with the way things have gone, but they that they it's tough because I don't want to speak for them, but I feel like when you see teams like FaZe and Thieves and Vancouver in these finals this year, it's like obviously if you ask somebody involved in Miami, they're like, yeah, we want to win, and they're not going to tell you no, we don't want to
Yeah.
win. But it's just like I don't know how to say this. It's a for a team like Miami that hasn't necessarily had that success and that championship pedigree in the past, like how can you say like, yeah, we're gonna go out there and do this thing we haven't done before until you've actually done it. So I don't know. Um, Not to take anything away from
Yeah.
them though, really good team, and I'm really excited to see how they play at this major. But um, they especially the way the bracket shook out. If they are going to win this tournament, they're going to have to go through some really tough teams, and that'll be a good test to really see where the squad is at.
It's not entirely analogous, but if you follow the NBA, obviously the Detroit Pistons were putrid last year. They lost nearly 30 games in a row. They were the worst team in basketball, one of the worst teams in NBA history for a time. And this season, they had a winning record. They went to the playoffs. They forced game 6 against the Knicks, nearly won that game. And yes, they didn't even win a playoff series, but I think it was fair to say if you're a Detroit fan or if you're even within that organization, you come away with that like, man, we really did so much better than we ever could have thought we were going to. And like we take that kind of positivity and this experience into the next season. In some ways, it is similar to what Miami is doing right now, because personally, I don't think that they're in that top 3. I don't think that they're particularly close, to be honest, just because I know exactly what that top level is with Vancouver, LAT, and Atlanta. I don't think Miami can get there, maybe for a match, and maybe that is all that really matters. But I think in general, they're not going to be able to consistently beat those teams when it really matters. That being said, it doesn't matter, to be honest, because as much as Miami surely wants to win, and maybe they do believe that they can be one of those top teams and they can beat those top teams, that's not where anybody would have expected them to be. No one even right now expects them necessarily to beat the top teams and to be like a legitimate championship contender at Major 4 or Champs. But they have essentially locked up a spot at Champs, which was not something I believe that you could have said about them last season. I think they kind of went into the major, the final major of that season, thinking, okay, we need to win one match or whatever to clinch a spot at Champs. And now they're going into this as the 5th seed. Like you laid out, it is possible that they get the 4th seed if they were to win, and them winning is not like the most impossible scenario. It's just a win in and of itself for Miami. I looked up the stats while you were talking, and before Super came into the roster, technically this does include that one match he played in place of Meadows as an emergency substitute. But before he became a full-time member of the starting lineup, they were 7-15, and obviously they were pretty good in hard point. They were above 500. They had 11-20 map count in search and destroy, and they were 7-15 in control. And then since he has come into this roster, they are 11-3, which is amazing. Like that is a crazy number to think about, that they are 11-3 since he's come into this roster after winning only 7 of their 22 matches before he was officially a part of the lineup. And like you said, the search and destroy has been just astounding. They're only 500 in hard point and control. Like literally they are 20-20 in respawn. But the reason that they're winning matches is because they are 16-3 in search and destroy with this roster. And that's incredible. And like you said, S&D wins championships. And if there is a potential opportunity for Miami to win championships, it is to beat the top teams in search and destroy and hope to take one of those respawns away from them. And I don't think that's an impossible or like this crazy thing to think about, but that to me is just wild that Miami is even in this position where we're talking about, them having a chance against the 3 best teams full of these superstars. We would consider these super teams pretty much. And now, well, maybe not Vancouver, but certainly 2 of the 3, and then potentially the best roster pickup in CDL history. But we could honestly be talking about super in that category if Miami is able to get to the major finals, potentially win one of these last two events. And, that's a hats off to Miami and them kind of sticking to their plan, because when you have an all Spanish roster, I think there's a lot of disrespect thrown on your name and people think that you kind of have a low ceiling. And they've proven that their ceiling is way, way higher than anyone thought.
And that's really, I mean, not necessarily incredibly important to the conversation we're having right now, but I remember talking about that when Miami officially announced their roster for last season after the rebrand and all that stuff is like Metals and Lucky and even Journey to some degree were coming into this, and they had the experience before where they like qualified for the CWL. I don't remember, that's a long time ago, but when they did that, it was a similar story where it was like, oh, these guys made it to the CWL, but they're not going to do anything. And I don't think they really did much, but I definitely remember them like, causing some upsets and making some moves and stuff like that. At that time, it definitely, their leaps and bounds beyond that at this point right now this season. But that's been a narrative really since the whole all Spanish roster has existed, whether it's in the CWL or CDL era. So that's just another reason to give more praise to Miami. They're obviously they're going about we talked about this with like Paris when Paris was a thing, going down the all French route, and you know obviously they never decided to do that, but like Miami's doing it to the point where they're sticking with their branding and their ideology, and it's paying dividends now. It's just getting to that next level of eventually hoisting a trophy. If you're a Miami fan, that's got to be the end goal.
In the YouTube chat, Matt McGinty said Rincor and Super top 3 AR duo, which I think is kind of hard to argue with just because they have the results, at least recently.
Yeah.
They're going to be asked to do it on land and to do it consistently, but obviously, like, when you're 11-3 over the last month and a half, 2 months, like there's not a lot of teams that have won 11 to 14 matches. And, I think obviously you're going to always bank on the top, like the top teams. And like those guys are just like, you're going to say that they're the better, AR duo or SMG duo, but I mean, results are results. And especially if they're able to kind of make some noise at Major 4, then it's kind of hard to argue about that. Chris in the Twitch chat said, are you guys that high on Vancouver after this stage? They look like they took a step back. I think they certainly do look like they've taken a step back. I don't know if that is like real or not, because some of these online matches, like you look at a team like FaZe, they have perpetually looked like they've taken a step back when they get to the online portion, and then they got to the first 2 lands at least, and they turned up and they look like the best team in the world. LAT has had those moments too where you're like, what the hell are they doing, more earlier in the season, but then they go to land and they are able to back it up. I think that's kind of the tack that I want to take with Vancouver. I don't know about you, Bank, but Vancouver has gone back-to-back grand finals at the majors. Yeah. They've shown the ability to beat the top teams. LAT has been more of a struggle, obviously, but I think they're still a great team. They're still one of the top 3 teams, and it really just matters what happens on land at the end of the day, especially now. Like, it doesn't matter at all what happens online. So I think Vancouver is, I think I'm still high, to answer your question. I'm still high on Vancouver. I still think they're one of the top 3 teams. I think they have the ability, just like FaZe and LAT, to win a major, to win champs. What about you?
Yeah, I think the first week of the qualifiers here, they had that little blip where they lose to FaZe, which we talked about that FaZe matchup. They've really gone back and forth since the Neptune acquisition, and then the OpTic loss was the most surprising one for me for Vancouver. But then we talked about it, whatever episode it would have been after those matches, where Nasty had the tweet like talking about a lack of teamwork or whatever his exact phrasing was. I didn't feel like scrolling back on his Twitter to find the exact wordage in his tweet, but since then they definitely have played a little better. So maybe we have to give them the benefit of the doubt. Like you said, two straight grand finals appearances, and that's really like this 1 week of qualifiers here to start Major Four has really been the only like blip on the radar for this team. I guess you could count um the grand finals where they're losing 4-0 as, depending on how much stock you want to put into that, but at the end of the day they're still in the grand finals, right? So um yeah, I mean that's just real. That's been the one like bad week that this Vancouver team has had since Neptune has joined the roster. So I don't want to overreact to that, but I do think that the consequence of that uh, struggle and to start the qualifiers is they have to play Thieves in the first round of this major, and they've struggled against Thieves all season. It's not the FaZe situation where they do have, multiple wins against FaZe this season since Neptune came into the roster. Vancouver has struggled against Thieves. Um, but at the same time, if Vancouver do lose again to Thieves, I could definitely see them going on a losers bracket run. Especially the way the bracket shakes out. I believe they'd play Vegas Falcons in the first round, and then most likely after that it would be the winner of Boston Breach versus Miami if Miami, or sorry, Boston Breach versus Minnesota if Miami beats Minnesota. So I think that's like, those are two matches that Vancouver should win if they do drop down to the loser bracket, and that could propel them potentially on a run to still make it to Sunday. But we'll talk more about that bracket and everything in the preview show later this week.
Chris responded, said, "You can't compare Vancouver to FaZe and LAT. They're world-class players." I would disagree that you can't compare them. I think they are the third best team. I don't think that I I'd have a hard time arguing them over FaZe or LAT. I think Bink would probably feel similar in that fashion. Like, obviously, you can't say they're better than LAT because they haven't been able to
Yes,
beat LAT. You
they
could,
have beaten FaZe.
yeah, you can argue that they are better than FaZe, even though some of the recent results haven't been up to par. The biggest issue though is like the controls have been very bad, and obviously we talked about control is the least important game mode, but it's not like nothing. Obviously, if you lose those consistently, you're essentially giving a map to the other team, and that puts so much pressure on your hard point and search. The fact that you have to win one of those first two maps to avoid getting swept, and that's been the issue for Vancouver against FaZe and LAT since Neptune came into this roster. They're 10-10 in hard point against those two teams. They're 6-11 in search, which is obviously bad, and then they're 2-10 in control. So yeah, I think it's incorrect to say you can't compare them. I understand why anybody would doubt them against those two teams in particular, but there's no doubt in my mind they're one of the top three teams. Like, they're the third best team in my mind, and I don't think there's a real solid argument for any other team. You could say, well, look at Miami. I'm just going to ask for Miami to kind of prove it more on land, where I have seen Vancouver, even though they have fallen short in the grand finals, they've at least gotten there. And
Yep.
we can't forget that they've had game fives against LAT. I believe they've lost at least one a game 5 to them, and then they lost game 7 to them in the major 2 qualifiers, or the minor 2 qualifiers, right? Or the minor 2 final, excuse me. I believe that was kind of their big, this is like what we can do. Obviously, is not really worked out once they got to land, and they've had some pretty disappointing grand finals performances. But still, I do believe in Vancouver. I think they can win. It's going to be tough. Like, those are the two most talented rosters in the entire world, LAT and FaZe. And to beat them, you're going to have to play essentially perfectly, especially if you get to the finals and it's best of 7. Like, that's going to be a tough ask for any team.
And I think, Chris just asked too, are they closer to Miami Ultra, OpTic, or LAT FaZe? I think the easiest way to look at that is LAT and FaZe. They've each been to 2 grand finals, just like Vancouver. The group of Miami Ultra and OpTic, they've been to 0 grand finals this year. So although the championships aren't there for Vancouver, FaZe have 2 championships, made it to 2 grand finals. LAT 1 championship, made it to 2 grand finals. Vancouver 0 championships, but they've made it to 2 grand finals too. So I think they're closer to Atlanta and Thieves, but I mean, at the end of the day, that just goes back to what we said. Like, they're the third best team, uh, right now. I mean, that is true that they have gone 0-4 in both of those grand finals. But yeah, at the end of the day, you could look at a team like LA Thieves last year, where heading into champs and Esports World Cup, nobody was picking them to make it to the grand finals of Esports World Cup and make Championship Sunday. I think they got third at champs, or if I remember correctly. And that's just these tournaments coming up are where you want to see teams play at their best and show what they're truly capable of. So if Vancouver is the real deal, they got to continue to show us what they've shown us at these past couple tournaments by making it to the grand finals. And as you mentioned, if they do make it to another grand finals, they hopefully have to win a map this time.
Yeah.
At least one.
I was just looking at it. I believe Vancouver's 5-2 against OpTic, Toronto, and Miami since Neptune is in the roster. And obviously, I think there's probably a Miami series where it's pre-super in that roster. But I think the fact still remains that like they just beat Toronto this weekend. I think if you look at the LAN performances, they're generally pretty strong, especially compared to those three teams. Like OpTic hasn't proven it on LAN at all this season. Miami has been up and down. Toronto, I mean, we didn't really get to see what their team truly looked like at Major 3, even though Mercury's obviously had a great performance, but we don't know how exactly they would have turned out with Beans. So it is hard to compare those. I think they're solidly above those three teams, at least at this point. Things can really change on a dime. We've seen that many times. Just look at OpTic, how they came into Major 1. We thought they were a true contender, and it hasn't been the same since that point. But they're, like I said, 5-2 against those three teams with Neptune in the roster. I believe if I'm looking at Vancouver versus LAT and FaZe, they're like 2-3 and like 7 or something like that, which is kind of to be expected, to be honest. Like I think they've beaten FaZe 3 times.
I think they're 3-3 against FaZe now as of these qualifiers.
Yeah, and then they've lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So they're 3-8, I believe, against LAT and FaZe. So what I would say is like it's maybe you could say it's not a top 3, there's a top 2, and then there's Vancouver. I think it's kind of like, it's kind of here nor there, to be honest, because it certainly feels like Vancouver can beat FaZe, and on the best of circumstances, Vancouver can also beat LAT. So that's why I grouped them as a top 3. Because we talked about that triangle, I think, at the beginning of these qualifiers, how LAT beats Vancouver, Vancouver beats FaZe, and FaZe beats LAT. We'll see how that plays out. We haven't seen some of those matchups in a little bit, so we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, I think it's an important conversation to have. I think there was also something from. Was there anything else in the chat?
Oh, those are our guys. Shout out Chris. Shout out Matt. Chris on Twitch and Matt on YouTube. Thanks for showing love in the chats and giving us more to talk about.
Yeah, there was actually just the one thing on what Chris asked about OpTic, and that's how I wanted to lead into our next part, because OpTic, obviously, they had one of the weirder weeks that I can remember. It's not often that you lose to one of the worst teams and then you beat one of the teams that people think are maybe a contender. So OpTic this past weekend, they lose 3-2 to the LA Gorillas, mate, which I don't remember the last time LAG won a match, and we were just talking about it on last episode about how LAG is on pace to be, I believe, the 3rd worst team in CDL history in terms of record, and how they are kind of like sneaking under the radar about like how bad this season has truly been for LAG. And they officially were eliminated from champs contention, I believe, last week. And then they come in, OpTic, of course, kind of feeling a little bit high on themselves, I believe, from that first win with Mercules, thinking, okay, maybe this is the time. You even picked them, I believe, in both of their matches this weekend, thinking like, you even said, like, I believe in Mercules, I believe the hype, and then they lay an egg in the first match of this week, literally the first match out of the gate. They lose both hard points to LAG, which is just impossible to think about that OpTic of all teams would lose hard point, but they lose 250 to 230 and then 250 to 233. and then they lose game 5 S&D, and they become this incredible stat to think about. OpTic is now the only team to lose to the Vegas Falcons and the LA Gorillas, mate. The two worst teams this season, two of the very worst teams in CDL, and if you want to extend it, in Call of Duty esports history. That is crazy to think about, but I think it kind of sums up the OpTic experience very well, because then they come right back today and they beat the Toronto Ultra 3-0. And I don't know, like that just, to me, again, we talked about how that hard point was very weird. They didn't even get to, like, OpTic wins 220 to 216, just a crazy score to think about. But then they win 6-4 on S&D, 3-1 in Control. And going back to Chris's his question, he said, what about OpTic? They were one hiccup away from a 4-1 split, have lost 2 Control rounds. I've said this about OpTic in the past, and I will say it again. I always believe that they have the chance to win a tournament. When they were in that really bad slump where they're barely winning any matches at all, I said, yeah, like logically, I would say they're going to get double first rounded, or they're going to lose in the losers round, and they're going to get eliminated at a major. But this is OpTic, and what I saw from them last season is them have a horrible split right before they went into champs, and then they won champs. So I believe that OpTic at any point can beat pretty much anybody if they're actually playing well. It's just we haven't seen them consistently play well. So I think that's very fair to say they were close to being 4-1 in the split. I believe they finished third in the qualifiers. So even with those 2 losses or losing to LAG like that, you can say, well, they're still third. They're still one of the top teams heading into this major. And they play Toronto in that first round, like we mentioned, and they just beat Toronto. Again, I think it's very possible OpTic makes a run. I have a hard time like really staking a claim in them, though, because we've watched this whole season. What do you think about OpTic now that they are actually starting in the winners bracket for the change?
So it's a weird spot for me, because I do think it's important to remember that OpTic won the first match of these qualifiers against Vancouver. They won that with Skies in the roster. So even though they go 3-2 in these qualifiers, they're really 2-2 since Mercules joined the roster. And you look at the win over Toronto today. They also beat Carolina, but we've talked about Carolina at that point. But how much does the win over Toronto outweigh losses to teams like Boston and LAG? I think that's like, part of the conversation, and in terms of, the green wall and all that, that's like something you got to ask yourself, like, what does those matches mean in terms of your where you think this team is right now heading into the major? And I honestly think if OpTic was playing literally I can't say any other team, because if they were somehow playing Vegas in the first round, I can't even say
You
LAG
can't say
because
that.
they just lost to LAG. But
That's
let
the
me
point,
rewind the
though.
tape for a second here. Yeah, if they were playing any other team other than Toronto in the first round of major major 4 here, I would legitimately not know how to pick that match, just because I have seen them beat a team like Toronto and I've seen them lose to a team like LAG and Boston. So I really just, I want on the record, I've picked OpTic in all 4 matches since they've added Mercules to the team. I have fully bought into Mercules and what he brings to the table here. But the fact of how the matches have turned out, and the 2-2 record, like if they were playing any other team, it would be, I would have to like really think about the match. Obviously, if they were playing like FaZe or LA Thieves, I'm picking FaZe or LA Thieves there. But like some of those other middle of the pack teams, if that's who their first round matchup was here, I would, I could probably be swayed to go either way. But the fact they just beat Toronto, now they play them again in the first round of the major. I picked OpTic to beat Toronto in this match today, so I would most likely pick OpTic again to win that match. But it's not, I'm not super confident in that just because what if the Optic that lost to LAG shows up? Then, I don't know. It's a weird spot to be in. I think given the circumstances of Optic season and everything that has gone on this year, um, they've really, you know, this iteration has the most potential in my eyes. Um, maybe you can't, and maybe that's not a totally fair assessment because they did have the roster that won champs, but at least of the recent iterations, uh, and comparing with Skies, I just think with Mercules in the roster, this team has more potential to cause some damage. And I just, in general, I am excited to see Optic versus Toronto again on LAN after we just saw them play today online. Um, but if Optic wins that match against Toronto to kick off Major Four, that would already give them their best placing of the season because I think they'd automatically be top 6, right? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
That's how it works out. So they've been top 8 all 3 other majors. So they literally, if they beat Toronto, which is the team they beat just a couple hours ago, already guaranteed their best placing of the year, and then it's all up from there if you're the Green Wall. So interesting spot to be in for Optic. Very weird week, like you said, especially that the rewind hard point against LAG, where LAG made like a 100-ish point comeback. That was kind of just wild.
Yeah.
And that came right after Optic 3-0'd LAG in a 5.5 minute control map. And they had all the momentum to start that hard point, and then just something happened where LAG were able to pull off a comeback. And on a side note there too, I don't know if you saw the clip, but there was the clip of like after they lose the game 5, the last round of the Protocol S&D, where like
Scooter Hex
just like Hex like silently scoots away. I thought that was hilarious,
especially because he went in front of every single camera consecutively too. So it's great comedy from the Optic crew.
So yeah, right now with Optic, I mean, if you're the Green Wall, I think you have to be happy with the way things are looking and the potential that this team has shown. That LAG match is definitely, that LAG match plus the Minnesota win over Carolina. Like, if those go the other ways, Optic is in an even more comfortable spot in terms of the champs race. So there's still that potential. If Optic get top 12 at Major 4 and Minnesota go on a run, that Optic could be bumped out of the champs race, and that would be just wild. But mathematically, it is a possibility. So that puts even more pressure on this Toronto versus Optic rematch, where Optic, win it. They basically, if Optic wins that first match, I think it's 15 points, and that would put them at 190, which would be 55 over Minnesota. So Minnesota basically then has to get like third place minimum in order to pass them. So it's mathematically possible, but it's still very tough, and it gets tougher the more Optic wins. Optic only hurts themselves by losing. So we'll have to see what version of Optic. I mean, I'm sure many Green fans would have loved to be heading into this tournament with a 2-0 week, especially given that LAG match earlier. If they were able to win that and beat Toronto, I think they'd be super high right now on this team. They'd be really pumped up. But just those losses to LAG and Boston, they happened, and I can't ignore them. So I really, end of the day, I want to just see more of this Optic team with Mercules in the roster.
What's interesting, since he's come into the roster, they've obviously played 4 matches online. They're in the 2 losses, they lost game 5s. In the 2 wins, they swept. And I just think like that's an interesting idea. Like, they seem to be pretty good, and obviously getting to game 5 does take some level of skill and talent. But also, like, it seems weird. And then I was looking like even deeper than that. The last 5 wins for Optic this season were 3-0s, all of them. Granted, there was a pretty big gap between, the 5th most recent 3-0 and the 4th most recent, because there was like 3 weeks where they lost 4 matches in between. But it's been pretty interesting since they beat Vegas on April 25th. They have not won more than one match in a row or lost more than one match in a row. So they won that match. They lost to FaZe. They beat Vancouver. They lost to Boston. They beat Carolina. They lose to LAG, and then they beat Minnesota, or they beat Toronto. Excuse me. So if we're following that pattern, then round one of the winners bracket does not look too good for OpTic Texas. I don't know if that means anything, especially because only 4 of those matches have been with Mercules, and I think he's looked pretty good. He has a 1.2 KD still. He is obvious, like he looks like the best player in the lobby when he plays, and I think that's pretty. That would certainly make me more confident if I'm an OpTic fan going into the major, and just obviously having just beaten Toronto as well. But I don't know what to think about OpTic. I don't know if they're a true contender or if they're going to kind of lay an egg. They could just do what they did at Champs last year. Granted, they had shown us that they could compete before that point, but it does feel like it could, if there was a team that did this where they basically tank the regular season and then they get to Champs and they just kind of run the table, or at least make a major run in general. I feel like OpTic is probably the team to do that with the talent that they have, because the talent on this roster is not indicative of, or I guess the record that they have this season and the place that they have in the standings, that is not indicative of the talent that they have, which has been kind of like why we've been so screwed up with our predictions. Like, you have been picking OpTic a lot. I picked OpTic especially earlier in the season, and it just doesn't seem to be kind of clicking, and I don't know why that has been the case. I know people, especially after that LAG loss, were like, it's Shotzi's fault, it's Dashy's fault. They've been like the through line throughout this entire season. And then they beat Toronto, and I think those people get a lot quieter, and the people that are big Shotzi and Dashy supporters, they get a lot louder. I don't know what the difference is. I don't know why it seems like they show up at certain points and then they don't show up at all at other points. But if they do it at Major 4, or even if they don't and they do it at Champs, that crap does not matter one bit. It only matters about what you do when it actually is on the line and when a championship is at stake. We've seen it in traditional sports where, I mean, look at Eli Manning and the New York Giants. I don't think they had over a 500 record in either of those Super Bowl seasons. Maybe they were 9-7 or whatever. I believe they were 8-8 in the other. It didn't matter because they competed and they performed well once it got to the postseason. Maybe we'll see something similar with OpTic, where they get to Major 4 or they get to Champs, and then it's time to win, and they win. So we'll see what happens with OpTic and everybody. Any other matches that kind of pop out to you from this week that you want to talk about?
Let me just do the rundown real quick, and
Yeah.
then we can probably get out of here unless something pops up while we're doing this.
Yep, go ahead.
So last 10 matches of the Black Ops 6 CDL season. Friday, May 16th, OpTic versus LAG. Just talked about it. LAG 3-2 win. Big shocker there to kick off the week. Carolina versus Minnesota. Minnesota won that one 3-1. Talked about that. And then LAT versus Boston. LAT won 3-0. Big win for LAT, given they were 1-2, I believe, in these qualifiers heading into this match. And Boston previously beat them at Major 2, I believe. So big win for LAT there. Not totally unexpected, but still to actually get it done, that had to feel good for them. Saturday, May 17th, Atlanta versus Vegas 3-0. Nothing really crazy to write home about there. LAT versus C9 was another 3-0 for LAT. C9 did look a little bit more competitive in that match than maybe some people thought. But the big thing in that match was in game 2, Rewind Search Industry went to around 11, and in a 4v4, Envoy pulled off a ninja defuse for the win. Anybody who has watched the Ego Chall long enough knows how much of a fan I am of ninja defuses, let alone ninja defuses when every single player in the round is still alive. So shout out Envoy for that. But despite that one being a 3-0 for LAT, that was a pretty close match. I think haven't really talked about Cloud9 in today's episode. I am excited to see what they could possibly do at this event. Obviously, tough first round matchup against FaZe, but they did just beat them in these qualifiers, I believe. So might be something to keep an eye on there, and we'll talk about that more in the preview episode. After that, Miami versus Carolina. Miami 3-0s, talked about that already. And Vancouver versus Toronto. Vancouver won 3-1. I don't think we talked about that one in particular, but absolutely wild map one, hardpoint 250 to 248 on red card, where Toronto pulled off a comeback, and then that was followed up by a 6-5 search win for Vancouver. Then the next two maps after that, Vancouver kind of ran away with it, but that was a pretty, especially those first two maps, definitely bangers if you're looking for any matches from this weekend to go back and watch. And then today's action, May 18th, Boston versus LAG, 3-0 win for Boston. OpTic versus Toronto, OpTic 3-0. Talked about that in Vancouver, Minnesota. Vancouver won 3-1. So those are your scores for the final online matches of the CDL 2025 season.
At the end of the online CDL season, here are the standings as we go into the final major of the season, the final chance to get CDL points, and obviously the final way to actually qualify and stamp your ticket or punch your ticket, I think is the correct analogy or whatever, to go to champs. So right now, first place, LA Thieves at 440 points, 10 points behind them is second place Atlanta FaZe. Then there is a 90-point gap between FaZe and third place Toronto Ultra, 10 points behind them, Vancouver Surge. Miami Heretics are about 95 points behind Vancouver. We talked about that a little bit earlier. So Miami is in fifth place. Carolina is in sixth place, 15 points behind Miami. 20 points behind Carolina is seventh place Boston Breach. And then 25 points behind Boston is eighth place OpTic Texas. As it stands, if the season ended today, OpTic Texas would qualify. They would be the last team to qualify for champs, and they would get the reward of playing the LA Thieves in the first round of champs. Ninth place, the first team out right now, Minnesota Rocker, like you said, they are 40 points behind OpTic, so they have a lot of work to do at Major 4 in order to make up that ground and to jump OpTic. For 8th place, C9 has even more work to do. They're 125 points, so they have 50-point gap to OpTic. They're 10 points behind Minnesota. And LAG and Vegas are in 11th and 12th. They are both officially eliminated from champs contention. LAG has 40 points this season. They're 5-25 on the year. And the Vegas Falcons have 20 points. They are 2-27. I will also give you the standings for the Major 4 qualifiers because this is most relevant to what's about to happen at Major 4. Like we talked about, Miami Heretics, they got first place. They were the only team to go 5-0. Atlanta were the only team to go 4-1. They finished in second. There were 4 teams that finished with a 3-2 record, but OpTic gets the 3rd seed, LAT gets the 4th seed, Vancouver gets 5th, and Toronto gets 6th. 3 teams finished 2-3, but C9 gets 7th seed, Minnesota gets the 8th seed, and my Boston Breach will start in the losers bracket with the 9th seed, and then 3 teams finished with 1-4 records, LAG at Carolina and Vegas. So that sets up the Major 4 bracket. The 1 through 8, they start in the winners bracket. 9 through 12 start in the losers. Miami will play Minnesota in the first round. LAT will play Vancouver in an incredible first round matchup. Atlanta FaZe will play C9 New York. And like we just talked about, OpTic will play Toronto in a rematch of the most recent qualifiers for both of them. And then again, Boston, Vegas, LAG, and Carolina will begin in the losers bracket. So a lot of interesting storylines going into this final major, but obviously the biggest, most overarching theme is for those bottom few teams with Minnesota, C9, OpTic, maybe even Boston if something crazy were to happen, I think. But mostly those 3 teams, OpTic, C9, and Minnesota, those are the teams to watch for at Major 4. OpTic is in the driver's seat. They're overwhelmingly likely to make it to champs. But like we said, if they get double first rounded, for example, and C9 and or Minnesota have a run, then it kind of calls into question what's going to happen. We saw that with the New York Subliners a few seasons ago. One final major can really make or break a team's season, and it would be a shame for OpTic when they look like they're kind of figuring it out. At least they're winning matches now. Like they've won 3 matches in these qualifiers, which hasn't happened in a while. It would kind of be a shame for them to get bumped out of champs because they didn't perform at the major, but that's how it goes. Any last thoughts before I wrap up the show?
I will say just on that, the champs race breakdown there points wise. I already said earlier in the show, it's 100 points for winning the major. It's 75 points for getting second. So if Cloud9 gets second at Major 4, they would be tied with Boston Breach at 200. That's assuming Boston Breach get top 12 and don't win a match at the major. So basically, Cloud9 has to win Major 4 to pass Boston in CDL points, and that would mean like the finals would have to be Cloud9 versus Minnesota in order for Boston and OpTic to both not make champs. So again, mathematically it is possible for some craziness to happen, but just due to where both teams are in the standings and whatnot, it just doesn't seem incredibly likely. But like you mentioned with New York and in previous seasons, crazy things have happened, and it is Call of Duty. So only other thing in the standings wise, kind of glossed over it, but I know we mentioned it in past episodes, is LA Thieves right now, 440 points, Atlanta at 430. So that means that Atlanta has to outplace Thieves at this event in order to keep their streak alive of ending every CDL season with the most CDL points and finishing in first place. If Atlanta ties Thieves placing wise at this tournament, Thieves will be the first team other than Atlanta to finish the season with the most CDL points. Atlanta has to outplace them, so that is something else to watch out for.
And like I said, OpTic right now, they would play LAT in the first round of champs. I mean, they're the most likely they're going to play either LAT or FaZe in the first round, which I know OpTic fans have complained about something like that before, where even if they succeed, they have to play these really difficult teams. So, I mean, anything could change, I guess, because OpTic could get into 7th. They could, theoretically, they could get as far as 5th place if Carolina, Miami, and Boston kind of fall to the wayside. OpTic has a really good performance at Major 4. That's all kind of within the realm of possibility, but it is looking most likely that they're going to play one of the top 2 teams in the world to start off champs. But before we're not even at champs. We're not even, if you really want to look at it, we're not close because there's still a lot of Call of Duty to be played at the final major. Major 4 will be starting next week, next Friday. It will be May 23rd, and then we'll see what happens there. But we'll give a full major preview. We've talked about how that's kind of like one of our favorite shows of the season is when we actually get to break down the major. We get to talk about that matchups. And I should say before you talk, Pick'em so far this season, you did really well this week. Your only loss was the OpTic and LAG match, which is, it's like there's no way to predict that. So you were 144-76 after a 9-1 week. I went 7-3, and so I had a 3-match advantage. So now I am 145-75, just 1 match ahead of you going into the final major.
Only thing I was going to say, we kind of didn't mention it, but we'll talk about it during the preview show too, is unlike other majors this year, this event, because it's at DreamHack, it starts on Friday. Every other major in recent years and this year has started on Thursday, 4-day event. This event will be only 3-day event, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and there will be 2 streams for the matches on Friday, which is something, back in some of the old days and COD champs have passed, there was like 8 streams, and some events for pool play there were 4 streams going on. Those are some of my fond memories where I had the 4 Twitch stream boxes up watching the matches and writing down the scores for all 4 games at the same time. But keep that in mind if you're planning on watching this tournament. It starts on Friday, not Thursday like other tournaments this year.
Yeah, there'll be, I believe, 9 matches on Friday, so there's a lot of action to follow if that you're into that. Like you said, I don't think there's like a multi-Twitch thing or like equivalent for YouTube. I don't believe so.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
So you should have 2 monitors or put one on the TV, watch another one on your laptop or something. I don't know what the best solution is, but we will be back before that. We'll be back probably Wednesday, May 21st. Yeah, because it starts on Friday, so we actually don't need to do a day earlier like we did the
Yep.
last time. So we'll
And then
probably,
have Bean's visa issues again. Anyway.
which I don't know if there is a resolution to that. I was actually thinking about it earlier because obviously that wasn't that far ago. Like that was 4 weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
And it's in America again. Like I said, when they were kind of debating, like obviously if it's just based on champs, then you stick with Beans. Like if that is really what they wanted to do, they could stick with Beans because champs is in Canada. But this major is in Texas again, so we'll see what happens with Beans and any potential visa issues. But we'll be back on Wednesday, May 21st, to talk about whatever news comes up in that time, and of course to preview the final major of the CDL season. And that'll be one of the last. That will be the last pod of the CDL regular season because we'll recap Major 4 and talk about whoever made champs and who did not afterwards. So that about does it. We're about an hour and a half in. We appreciate everybody that stopped by today. Chris and Matt, especially, just awesome to hear from you guys and to answer some of your questions or interact with you in both the Twitch and YouTube chats, which is not usual. We don't usually get Twitch chatters. Mostly it's YouTube. But we appreciate you guys stopping by and kind of providing us a platform to talk about some of those things as we wrap up this season. Make sure to like, subscribe, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you want to watch those live streams, you can do so on YouTube or Twitch, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. You can also follow Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. You can follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast Twitter's at Ego Chall Podcast. And again, we'll be back midweek to talk about Major 4 and really give our predictions for what should be a very interesting LAN event. That does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yep, short and sweet from me. Thank you guys, as always, for all the support. Online season's done and dusted, but we still got 3 major lands coming up. So if you've been here throughout the season so far, thank you very much. Hope you join us for the rest of this journey as we round out this Black Ops 6 competitive season. But yeah, we'll be back later this week for the preview show. Should be a good one, and hope to see you guys there. So thank you guys as always, and remember to send the chow.